Upon the countless worlds throughout the Imperium of Man, arguably the most common sort of dwelling utilized by the innumerable billions upon billions of loyal citizens would be that of hive cities. These hives are essentially man-made mountains, comprised of numerous habitation blocks and factories that accreated over the course of centuries, if not millennia, becoming ever larger in the process to accommodate the ever-swelling human population, very much like the hives of insects from which the structures take their name. Typically, these hives are comprised of multiple layers, including upper spires, where the richer and more powerful members of society will reside, and areas known as underhives, which are extremely dangerous, becoming home to not only outlaws, but also to mutants and dangerous alien organisms. Some worlds may only have a few such hive cities across their surface, while others can become completely encapsulated by numerous clusters of these structures. Those worlds that sport an exceptionally high number of hive cities will become classified, appropriately enough, as hive worlds. One of the most notorious of all these worlds is that of Necromunda. Necromunda is notable for not only being a world relatively close to Terra itself, but also due to its exceptionally dangerous wildlife, high industrial output, and the numerous conflicts fought between the many gangs who pledged their loyalties to one of the world's many clan houses. The population of Necromunda is also a notable source of potential recruits for the Imperial Fist Space Marine chapter, with a permanent contingent of which residing within a structure known as the Spear of Dawn, a fortification that was constructed upon the highest peak of the world's capital hive of Hive Primus. Aside from the capital of Hive Primus, the world of Necromunda has many other notable cities, including the ancient and highly ornate Acropolis Hive, and the religious capital known as the Temenos. But one of the most infamous and feared of these cities is that of a derelict hive within a small and remote hive cluster known simply as the Skull. The Skull, so named for the 3 large holes within the superstructure of the hive, giving it an appearance reminiscent of a skull half buried in the surrounding ash, is one of Necromunda's most notorious landmarks, even to the point of being worshipped by the nomadic tribes that traverse the endless ash wastes that cover the world's surface. Despite being long abandoned, the Skull is a source of both fear and awe, and most people, be they a typical hiver, ash nomad, or mutant scavy, refuse to set foot anywhere near the Skull or the surrounding hives of its adjacent cluster. During M39, rumours began to surface of strange, animalistic howls emanating from the Skull, as well as strange burning effigies and hulking shadowy figures being spotted by travellers. After receiving these reports, the Imperial Fists would dispatch a strike force to deal with this unknown beast. Several months after the force was dispatched, a lone and heavily wounded Space Marine would emerge from the Skull before being rescued by the members of an ash waste gang, who located the Imperial Fist along the outskirts of the cluster. This lone Imperial Fist would deliver a final report to his brothers within the Spear of Dawn before succumbing to his injuries. Since then, the Imperial Fists have strengthened and reinforced the defences around the Skull, and all details regarding the report made by the lone surviving Astartes were sealed away. So just who, or what, is this mysterious creature that dwells within the depths of the Skull? It's no secret that the hives of Necromunda have become subjected to numerous Xenos infestations over the course of its history, as there have been documented accounts of creatures ranging from orcoids to gene stealers, and even the occasional Eldari wandering the depths of the world's many hives, in addition to the many dangerous and often highly mutated examples of Necromundan wildlife. In regards to the identity of the creature, or creatures, that are rumoured to exist within the depths of the Skull, it would initially appear that the most likely candidate would be a population of feral orcs. The reasoning behind this is due to one specific event that occurred during Necromunda's history, and at the site of the skull in particular: an Orc invasion. During the time of the Great Crusade, prior to the Imperial Fists having a permanent base of operations upon Necromunda, an Orc fleet would battle against Imperial forces within the Necromunda system and in orbit of the world. While Imperial forces fought desperately to prevent the Greenskins from making planetfall, several Orc rocks would fall upon the world's southern hive clusters, disgorging thousands of Orc warriors that would begin to rapidly overwhelm the world's planetary defense forces. The Space Marines would then launch an assault upon the massed Orc forces that had taken the cluster, before the Legion would ultimately destroy most of the hives within that vicinity, giving the cluster its iconic and terrifying appearance that would cause the planetary population to refer to it in future as the Skull. As a result of their actions in defending Necromunda from Xenos invasion, the Imperial Fists were invited to establish a permanent presence upon the planet, and given the right to use Necromunda itself as a recruitment world for the Legion. Despite the Orcs supposedly being purged by the Astartes, it is admittedly possible that a new population of Orcs has effectively risen from the ashes of their predecessors. This is due to the unique reproductive system of Orcoids in general, for instead of engaging in sexual procreation, Orcoids, the term including Orcs, Gretchen, and Snotlings, reproduce by shedding fungal spores. These spores will eventually take root before over time producing multiple types of Orcoid, be it of fungus, squigs, Snotlings, Gretchen, or Orcs. These spores are shed over the course of an Orcoid's lifetime, and are released en masse after their death. As a result, if the warriors of the Imperial Fists fail to take the appropriate measures to cleanse the ruins of the skull of Orcoid spores by immolating the interior of the hive, then it's certainly a distinct possibility that these spores could have taken root and spawned a new generation of Orcs. Given that the shadows witnessed within the hive are described as belonging to hulking individuals, then it would appear that these spores have spawned fully fledged Orcs, who are well known for being the largest and bulkiest of the hominid Orcoid strains. However, there is one particular flaw in regards to this possibility. If the creatures within the depths of the skull are merely as a result of a greenskin infestation, then why would the details regarding this particular event be sealed away by order of the Imperial Fists? Not only that, but why would it take over 9,000 years for the world's inhabitants to notice a burgeoning Orc population? While it is also worth noting that Orcs were supposedly sighted making planetfall upon Necromunda during M37, which in turn would explain as to how a population could still exist within the skull, this still would not explain as to why the records pertaining to the skull would be sealed away. The fact that the records of the Imperial Fist's operations within the skull were locked away would suggest that instead there is a more insidious reason behind the origins of those creatures that have taken up residence within the skull. Perhaps the new bestial residents within the skull could be in fact a gene-stealer cult. Necromunda is known for suffering from numerous gene-stealer infestations throughout history, with the most notable being documented within Hive Secundus and the Acropolis Hive. Gene stealers, both pure strain and the first few generations of hybrid alike, are also known to be large and bulky creatures, and thus in this regard could fit the description of the hulking forms that have been seen moving within the shadows of the skull. Such a cult would not even need to have originated from the skull itself, but instead, the members of the cult could have simply established the skull as their base of operations. This in particular is due to the fact that an extensive tunnel network exists beneath the surface of Necromunda, which in turn connects the majority of the world's hive clusters to one another. While only approximately 23.9% of this tunnel network still remains viable, it could still allow members of the Gene Stealer cult to use the skull as a hub to expand their influence, extending their reach to the many noble and clan houses of the world. The burning effigies that have been witnessed by travelers could even be the various symbols and examples of iconography utilized by the cult as visual representations of their father, the dominant pure strain organism known as the Patriarch. But ultimately, the idea of the Skull's inhabitants being a gene-stealer cult seems highly unlikely for one major reason. The earliest recorded instance of gene-stealers upon Necromunda is 879 M41, nearly 2,500 years after the Imperial Fists undertook their operations within the ruins of the Skull. While it is admittedly possible that gene-stealers had managed to make planetfall prior to this in itself does seem somewhat improbable, especially when taking into account that the earliest details of gene-stealer infestation upon Necromunda was as a result of an experiment enacted by the biologists of the Adeptus Mechanicus. But again, as mentioned earlier with the possibility of an Orkoid invasion, this still would not explain as to why all records regarding a series of events would be sealed away. This would seemingly leave only one possible reason behind the events occurring within the Skull, in that the cluster is now home to potential Chaos Cult activity. Perhaps the hulking shadows and bestial screams that have been witnessed within the Skull are as a result of cultists attempting to summon or bind demonic entities to their will. This would indeed explain as to why all records pertaining to the Imperial Fist's investigation of events unfolding there would be sealed away, as the Imperium is known to try to suppress all information regarding the ruinous powers from becoming public knowledge to the common citizenry of the Imperium. This would also provide an explanation to the appearance of the burning effigies, as many Chaos cults are known for erecting monuments, crude or otherwise, in honor of their new godly masters. The large shadowy figures being spotted by travelers could either be demons that have been summoned into the material realm by the cultists, or even the new monstrous and deformed forms of those who willingly allow warp-spawned entities to share their bodies in order to anchor such creatures within real space. While the idea of a Chaos cult inhabiting the Skull may seem quite feasible, this then leads to another question. If a Chaos cult is not only upon Necromunda, but also enacting rituals to summon demonic entities, then surely the Imperial Fists would have done more than simply reinforcing the defenses around the Skull cluster. The world of Necromunda has dealt with Chaos cult activity within the past, as a cannibalistic cult dedicated to the Chaos god Khorne was known to have existed within Hive Arcos. While this cult was initially able to drive back the forces of the Adeptus Arbites, who were sent to deal with the cult, the planetary governor of Necromunda, Lord Helmore, would trigger an artificial ash storm to bury Hive Arcos under millions of tons of ash. The governor decreed that the hive was to be buried for an entire generation, and as a result, condemned the members of the cult, as well as the remainder of the hive's population, to death by starvation. But this cannibal cult dedicated to Khorne was not documented as attempting to summon demonic entities. Such a particular threat would surely demand more attention from the Imperial Fist Space Marine chapter, especially upon a world so close to the Imperial throne world of Terra itself, perhaps even attracting the attention of the Grey Knights chapter, who, like the bulk of the Imperial Fists chapter, are relatively close to Necromunda, galactically speaking. If there truly is a Chaos cult within the Skull that is attempting to summon demonic entities, then the Imperium may be content to simply keep the cult effectively locked down due to one particular reason: industrial output. Necromunda is well known for its high industrial output and rapid production of goods, be they weaponry or other forms of equipment. While its productivity is nowhere near the level of output produced by a dedicated Forge world, the number of goods produced is still high enough that any significant drop such as those that will inevitably occur if knowledge of chaotic activity were to become public, would be considered undesirable by the Administratum. However, it seems unlikely that the Imperium would simply be content in keeping a Chaos cult locked away and, by extension, allowing them to continue whatever perverse rituals they desire, for the forces of the Imperium have been known to be highly zealous when dealing with the followers of their arch-enemy. Ultimately, the bureaucrats of the Adeptus Administratum must surely have a number of valid reasons for taking such potentially lackluster actions against the denizens of the Skull, whatever they may be. For if the denizens of the Skull were indeed a true danger to such a strategically and financially important world, then surely the Imperium would not be so incompetent as to let such a threat run rampant without taking the appropriate countermeasures. Would they? What do you think exists within the Skull? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.